Good evening, my lords, ladies, excellencies, distinguished guests, members of the Conservative Party. I want to warmly welcome you to this special event this evening, and particularly a warm welcome to many of you who are joining us from across continental Europe. I'm delighted that we've had such a high level of response for this evening's special event, and I know that you will enjoy the stimulating lecture which our chairman, Sir David Lidington, will give to us in just a few minutes' time. A few of you will have undoubtedly seen the banner behind David's head, which says Conservative European Forum, and may have wondered if you've joined the wrong meeting. Well, you haven't. The Conservative Group for Europe has been the name that many across the political spectrum would recognise as the banner of pro-European Conservatives for many years. And I suspect, to the regret of many from the UK attending this evening, the UK has now left the European Union. And those of us who believe in a close relationship with our European friends and neighbours have to recognise that reality and need to accept that we will need to prosecute the cause of pro-Europeanism in changed circumstances. So, reflecting on our new mission, of which you will hear more shortly, and the new circumstances in which we find ourselves, the Executive Committee has decided to rename the Conservative Group for Europe the Conservative European Forum. This name goes back to the original name of the group, when it was founded 53 years ago, which was the European Forum. But so there's no avoidance of any doubt that this is the home for centre-right leaning people and conservatives. We put the conservative in front of European. So tonight I want to warmly welcome you to the first meeting of the Conservative European Forum. And I'm delighted that you're able to join us this evening as we embark on this exciting new venture. And for those of you who follow us on Twitter, hashtag CEF launch, or Conservative European Forum launch, is up and running. So now let me give the floor to David Lidington, who will set out the challenges, opportunities and priorities that will shape what we in the Conservative European Forum intend to undertake over the next few months and years ahead. After that, he and I will engage in a question and answer session, and there should be some time for questions from the group. And I want to tell you all that we will be closing with a short video from our president, Ken Clark. David, the floor is yours. We very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. And could I add my welcome and my thanks to everybody who is taking part in this evening's meeting. I want to talk to you frankly, but also with a sense of determination and optimism about our work over the months and years ahead. And my starting point is that we have to deal with the world as it is, not with the world as we would wish it to be. Brexit has happened. In 3 days' time, a full year will have elapsed since the United Kingdom ceased to be a member of the European Union, and a month since transitional arrangements ended. For all of us who supported our country's membership of the EU and who campaigned and voted to remain in the 2016 referendum, this is a sad moment, and I doubt whether any of us have seen evidence, least of all in the last few weeks, to persuade us that the stance that we took 5 years ago was wrong. But we have to face facts. However many times you press the replay button for the 2016 campaign, our side still lost. And one of the things I've learned in 46 years as an active member of the Conservative Party, nearly 28 of them in the House of Commons, is that there are no prizes in politics for people or for parties who go around trying to tell the electorate that they, the voters, made a dreadful mistake last time. And those who urge that those of us who supported Remain should now embark on a campaign to rejoin the European Union are, I believe, misreading the mood, both here in the United Kingdom and amongst the 27 members of the EU. Here in the UK, the issue of Brexit has split families and broken lifelong friendships. I see no public appetite, least of all in the middle of the agony and the grievous economic damage of the COVID pandemic, to spend the next 5 years going through all that pain and bitterness again to reverse the 2016 decision in order to re-enter the European Union on what would inevitably be significantly worse terms than before, without the opt-outs or the rebates that we enjoyed until our departure. Nor should we kid ourselves about the mood amongst the 27. The day after the referendum, as David Cameron was on the steps of Downing Street announcing his resignation, I had to fly to Luxembourg to talk to the foreign ministers of the other member states about what had happened. Their mood at that meeting: shock, great sadness, but acceptance of the result and respectful of the legitimacy of the vote has characterized the EU response ever since. And I think it's a mistake to think the first thought of Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel, or any of the other leaders when they wake up in the morning is about Brexit, or indeed about the UK at all. With each month and year that has passed since our referendum, the 27 have focused ever more of their time and energy on their own economic and political future. Look, for example, at the published programme for the German presidency of the EU, which set the priorities for the second half of 2020. There was one solitary mention of the United Kingdom and exit negotiations on page 21, sandwiched between a paragraph on the United States and one on China. The current Portuguese presidency document, 37 pages in length, has 3 mentions of the UK, each limited to a brief, bland statement that the presidency will work for a comprehensive, fair and balanced partnership that respects the interests of the Union and its member states. The 27, like the UK, have enough problems of their own on their plate. They are grappling with the traumatic impact of COVID, while still facing the existential economic challenge posed by the digital revolution and global competition. They know that there is nothing remotely resembling a settled political consensus in the UK that we should rejoin. And worse, and we've got to be frank with ourselves here, worse, they ask themselves, seriously, and with real sorrow, not with glee, whether the United Kingdom will still exist in 10 years' time. And I think it is fanciful to think that they would now be eager for a new accession application. The question facing both the British government and its counterparts in the other European democracies is what kind of relationship we now want to build together over the next 5 to 10 years. And the challenge for us in the Conservative European Forum, which as the Conservative Group for Europe has for more than 50 years championed the United Kingdom's membership of the European Union, is to define a mission for this new situation in which our country will be outside the European Union, but joined to it by geography, history, a shared political, artistic and scientific culture, strategic interest, investment and trade. I believe our starting point has to be that however much we may regret the outcome of the referendum, we want our country to succeed. Far too often, even now and especially on platforms like Twitter, you find trench warfare going on. On the one hand, I see hardline leavers spying a plot behind any difficulty created by Brexit, who seem to refuse to be satisfied by the UK leaving and want every other state to do so as well. On the other, there are some ultra-Remainers, seems to be very much on the left of British politics, who respond not with sympathy, but with a sense of almost gleeful vindication to the struggles of small businesses, or the strains we are now seeing on the union of the UK in both Scotland and Northern Ireland. I don't believe that those voices are representative of the electorate as a whole, and we should have no truck with them. We supported British membership of the EU because we believed that was the best way to protect and maintain the security and prosperity of our country. Now, in our debates and our judgments about the new partnership that we want to help shape, between the United Kingdom and its neighbours. It is the national interest of the people of the United Kingdom that we again have to keep at the front of our minds. In thinking about how this country's relationship with the rest of Europe should now evolve, my starting point is the reality that the United Kingdom is a European power, but one which also has a global outlook and global interests. I see no conflict at all between us on the one hand strengthening our ties with Japan, Australia and South Korea, and on the other building a new kind of partnership with our European allies, with whom the UK will continue to share interests in common, and who as a region will for the foreseeable future remain our most important partner in investment and trade. A United Kingdom engaged in Europe, enjoying strong strategic relationships with its neighbours and allies, is an integral and essential element of global Britain, not an alternative to it. There are fewer than 20 villages in the United Kingdom that lost no one in the savage European wars of the 20th century. It is profoundly in the national interest of the United Kingdom that there should be some kind of institutionalized cooperation between European nations, founded on the rule of law, democratic government, and respect for human rights. And moreover, we and our neighbours alike face challenges: climate, pollution of the oceans, organised crime that no single country, not the UK, not France, not Germany, can tackle on its own. So I welcomed the Prime Minister's words on Christmas Eve in his speech announcing the new trade and cooperation agreement, the TCA, with the European Union. In those remarks, he described how he was, after what he termed a fractious and difficult period, now looking forward to a better relationship in the future. He spoke of the United Kingdom as the EU's friend, ally and supporter, and said that this country should stay strategically attached to Europe. Welcome too was Michael Gove's description of the TCA as the first step towards a special relationship, a phrase no British politician uses lightly, between the United Kingdom and the EU. And it's also worth recalling that even amid the sometimes harsh rhetoric of the divorce negotiations, on key international issues like climate, Iran, and Israel-Palestine, the Prime Minister chose to stay closely aligned with the European position, despite pressure from the Trump White House, and he beefed up further the UK's military commitment to the French-led counter-terrorist effort in the Sahel. Even so, after the history of the last few years, we are not going to see everything settling down quickly into some new equilibrium. The last 5 years have been scarring on all sides, and there will be more aftershocks, like the row over the status of the EU embassy in London, or the frankly shameful explosions of vaccine protectionism we've seen on both sides of the channel in the last week to 10 days. But the strategic challenge for the government and for Conservatives is to set about shaping a new relationship between the United Kingdom and the other democracies of Europe, different from the relationship that we had as an EU member, yes, inevitably so, but grounded in our common values and our shared interests. And this group too needs to reset its priorities. I believe there are three key objectives on which we should focus. First, the Conservative European Forum should be an advocate within the Conservative Party and among Conservative supporters and voters more generally for a close strategic partnership between this country and our fellow democracies in Europe. A partnership that includes both national governments and the institutions of the European Union. Second, we should establish the Forum as a thought leader in the debate that is going to develop over the months and years ahead about the best form of cooperation between the UK and the rest of Europe on different issues, from carbon reduction to financial services, data, economic competitiveness, or disrupting organised crime. Third, we should work to repair and strengthen the relationships between our own party and the mainstream parties of the Conservative and Christian Democratic centre-right in other European countries. For reasons that are obvious, those relationships are pretty bruised at the present. Although I want to pay tribute to the work that the young CGE, our youth wing, has been doing with the youth wing of the European People's Party, even despite the current the torrid experience of the last few years. I said those relations are bruised at the moment, and if we value our own national interest, that situation has to change. Parties like the CDU and CSU in Germany, the moderates in Sweden, and Partido Popular in Spain are either in government now or likely to be again in the foreseeable future. These parties share our own belief in individual freedom, personal responsibility, free enterprise, and limited government. We can learn from each other's experience how best to embody those principles in effective policies that change people's lives for the better. This is work for the next 5 to 10 years, and it will require us in the CEF to do more than just talk to ourselves. We should be confident in reaching out to engage both with those who wanted the UK to remain a member of the EU. Let's not forget still a fifth of Conservative voters at the December 2019 general election, and to pragmatic leavers, those who want a constructive, friendly relationship with the rest of Europe, but felt in 2016 that the EU had moved too far towards political integration for their comfort. So far, the indications from the government are that they envisage the UK's new relationship with the rest of Europe as being largely intergovernmental in character, using formats like the E3, in which Britain, France and Germany coordinate key diplomatic and security policy actions, and which has continued to operate during even the most acrimonious phases of the divorce negotiations. Now, in my view, government-to-government relations will indeed be important, and outside the EU we shall have to work harder to keep those intergovernmental relationships in good repair. Week after week, for almost 50 years now, UK ministers and officials have been meeting their counterparts from other European countries in council meetings. And as with any such gathering, the informal chat over coffee or in the margins of a plenary session are at least as valuable as the council itself. As Europe Minister and later as Justice Secretary, I would go to every council armed with a list of colleagues that I needed to talk to, often about EU business, but also perhaps a NATO or UN matter, or a bilateral problem that the two of us needed to sit down and try and resolve. Now, those meetings at councils are still taking place. The difference is that we, the UK, are no longer there. We will need to invent new arrangements to sustain understanding of each other's interests and re-establish mutual trust. And while I have huge admiration and respect for our diplomatic service, contacts through embassies will not be enough. Political leaders and senior officials from domestic departments will also need to be involved. For example, every year, the UK and France hold a joint summit, bringing together the President, the British Prime Minister, and key members of their respective cabinets. And that model, something like it, is what we shall need to maintain and develop relationships with Germany, with Ireland, with Sweden and others. I think we also, probably goes beyond time to explore in detail this evening, but we need to look at how less formal, non-governmental relationships between political parties, between think tanks, the use of the conferences like Königswinter and the Colloque can help to thicken up the kind of relationship that we need to see develop now. A good working relationship with the rest of Europe will also need to involve the institutions of the European Union. And as I say that, I can sense the shudder amongst some of our fellow Conservatives at the very thought. My argument to them is that we have nothing to fear. After all, we're no longer part of the EU, and that on the contrary, we have much to gain from a strategic relationship with our neighbours that reflects the reality that Europe conducts its business and takes decisions at both intergovernmental and union level. Now, I'm not under any illusion about the EU institutions, having spent more than 6 years of my life attending council meetings and paying frequent visits to both the Commission and the European Parliament. I know full well that they have flaws and they make mistakes, just like every other institution so far invented by human beings. To those who still fear to have any dealings with the Commission or the European Parliament, except at the tip of the very longest of barge poles, I would put 3 arguments. First, to make the trade and cooperation agreement work smoothly, we shall need a relationship of mutual trust with the Commission in particular. The TCA establishes an EU-UK Partnership Council, together with 16 committees and 4 working groups to cover issues from customs rules to food safety, trade in motor vehicles, energy, fisheries, aviation, VAT, and road transport. To them will fall the task of seeing the TCA implemented fairly and working out how a host of technical challenges should be resolved. We already know that on the EU side, the Partnership Council will be chaired by Maroš Šefčovič, one of the most experienced commissioners in Ursula von der Leyen's team, and the Commission is likely to staff the EU teams on the committees and working groups. Of course, there'll be time when interests clash and disagreements arise, but those will be a lot easier to manage if they take place in a context where the 2 sides feel able to speak to each other in a spirit of both candour and mutual trust, and understand at depth each other's perspectives and interests. And that's true as regards the implementation of both the TCA and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Second, while a lot can be done working state to state with national governments, the EU treaties give the Union collectively the legal authority to act on behalf of all members on a number of important issues. For the UK, winning international support for our ambitions to liberalise international trade, cut carbon emissions, or end the trade in endangered species is going to require us to deal with the EU at institutional level, with the Commission and with the European Parliament. Third, like them or not, the institutions are part of the political world, part of the fabric in which the member states think and work. The smaller countries see the Commission as both a means to amplify their power and a counterweight to France and Germany. They're suspicious of anything like the E3 that looks like the big boys trying to decide things over their heads. And even for the large member states, working through the EU system is an integral part of how they do business. I always remember being told by one of my officials when I was Minister at the Foreign Office of how Chancellor Merkel would ring Commission President Barroso to lobby for an appointee to a post right down to a Deputy Director General level within the Commission, because that was seen as something that was fundamental to how German interests should be protected and advanced. On so many of today's policy challenges, from the climate emergency to organised crime, terrorist threats, or the challenges which in their different ways both Russia and China pose to the world's liberal democracies, Britain will achieve more for our own people if we work in alliance with others. And as far as Europe is concerned, if we in the EU are serious about trying to influence and persuade the European Union from the outside, that involves developing deep strategic relationships at both nation state and EU level. We don't have time to waste. The COP26 climate summit in Glasgow later this year will be a major opportunity for the United Kingdom to show that outside the EU, it is still a power able to broker deals and shape global decisions. But ahead of the Glasgow meeting, the 27 EU members will negotiate among themselves an agreed collective position, almost certainly on the basis of a draft prepared by the Commission and taking account of opinion within the Parliament. Experience of previous international summits shows that once the EU collective position has been agreed, it is hard to shift, in large part because to make a change requires further time-consuming internal debate. So we need to be working now to understand the interests and opinions of the 27 member states and of the institutions, and to influence their collective decision in ways that will help the summit to reach a successful outcome. The UK and the rest of Europe share a common interest in effective action on climate, but only by working together will we be able to ensure that such action does not end up creating new barriers to trade and investment. Will the EU and the UK emissions trading schemes be compatible, or will there be a temptation on one side or the other to go soft on particular high energy users in order to hang on to important business investments? What would a carbon border adjustment mean in practice for businesses trading between the UK and the European single market? Or to deal effectively with serious and organised crime, whether online fraud or trafficking in drugs, counterfeit goods and people, we will also need to work with the rest of Europe. Ask any chief constable, and they'll say that nowadays every kind of organised crime has an international dimension. Worse still, the smugglers and fraudsters are now as professional in their operations and their organisation as any legitimate multinational business. The TCA has preserved some, but not all, of the benefits of police and judicial cooperation that we had as a member of the EU, and which enabled us to identify suspects, disrupt criminal activity, and see gangsters brought to justice. We shall need to work with national governments and the Commission to secure new arrangements that allow all of us in democratic Europe to protect our citizens' property and personal security. Crime is international, which in turn means it isn't possible to make a neat separation between cooperation on policing and cooperation on foreign policy. Traffickers send drugs from Latin America and the Caribbean to West Africa, from where the gangs transport them into Europe. To stop this pernicious trade requires not only that police forces work more closely together, but also the use of development aid, diplomatic leverage, and action to embolden and equip African leaders to act against the corruption and lawlessness that provide the environment in which the criminals thrive. I regret, therefore, very much the government's decision to exclude from its Brexit negotiating objectives any kind of structured security and foreign policy cooperation with the EU. And I hope that now we are fully out and no one can credibly fret about Brexit being blocked or betrayed, that the government will think again about that position. Around the world, our values and our model of politics, open, liberal, pluralist, rooted in respect for the rule of law and human rights and buttressed by democratic institutions, is being challenged more aggressively now than at any time in at least the last 30 years. The Russian chemical weapons attack in Salisbury in 2018 was part of a pattern. Military intervention in Georgia and Ukraine, interference in elections in Moldova, North Macedonia and Montenegro, the kidnapping of an Estonian official from inside his own country, probes into territorial waters in Sweden, cyber attacks, economic pressure, relentless information warfare. China has become ever more self-confident and assertive in promoting its own model of authoritarian government. And as we've seen with both Canada and Australia, willing to use economic power and a legal system ultimately directed by the Communist Party to try to bully other countries to comply with Beijing's demands. The China 2025 project openly proclaims Beijing's ambition to secure dominance in the global market for the key technologies of the 21st century: quantum engineering, synthetic biology, artificial intelligence. While President Xi and his colleagues make no secret of their ambition to see the rule-based international order changed to conform more to Chinese norms. In Africa and in the Western Balkans, corruption, weak governance and civil conflict leave a space within which criminal and terrorist networks are able to find a relatively safe place from which to plan and prepare. The United Kingdom is capable of making an enormous contribution to the capacity of the democratic world to counter these threats. We have significant military power and the political will to use it, outstanding intelligence services, one of the biggest and best diplomatic capabilities in the world, and an international aid programme which, even after the planned cuts, will still be one of the world's largest. The UK has lost the additional influence that came from being a leading member of the European Union, but is still a permanent member of the Security Council, active in NATO, Five Eyes, the G7, G20, OSCE, Commonwealth, WTO, IMF, OECD, and other international networks. And our soft power, the English language, the BBC, creative arts, universities, and the global reputation for fierce independence and impartiality of our judges and courts boosts our influence further. A United Kingdom willing and able to act globally with allies, and often through international institutions, brings strength to the democratic alliance. We should welcome the government's ambition to work more closely with Japan, Australia, India, and South Korea, and the idea of a D10 grouping of the leading democratic powers. But we also need to work strategically with the democratic partners in our own region. Our interests will not be served by leaving a Europe-shaped hole in our global strategy. It is true that NATO will remain the cornerstone of our national and of Europe's defence, but it can't do everything. Some of our close partners, Sweden, Finland, Austria, Ireland, are not members of NATO, but are willing to participate in EU or UN initiatives. It is doubtful that NATO on its own can respond adequately to the kind of hybrid conflict rehearsed by Russia in Ukraine, with information, cultural organisations and economic pressure used as well as or instead of military intervention, or that NATO can intervene to counter organised crime and build state capacity in Africa. It is hugely welcome that we now have an administration in the United States, our indispensable ally, which believes in the value of alliances and wants to see international institutions work more effectively rather than to tear them down. President Biden will expect his European allies to do more, to spend more on their own security, to show greater political leadership to address challenges in places like the Western Balkans and in Africa, and to help the United States in the region of the world that matters most to Washington, the Indo-Pacific. The early signals from the Biden administration are that America sees both the UK and the European Union as important allies, and indeed some of the incoming official team are reported to talk about a three-legged stool approach to policy, with the US, UK and EU working together to a shared strategic plan. We in Britain should welcome that way of working. After all, no plan for a more effective European pillar of the Atlantic Alliance makes any sense unless it has both the United Kingdom and France at its core and active involvement and support from other EU powers. In addition, the tripartite approach, which the Biden White House may have in mind, should, besides helping to shape a coherent response to Russia and China, ensure that the United Kingdom is in the room when the United States and the European Union sit down to discuss global regulatory standards or the rules governing world trade, and diminish the risk of the two biggest free market areas in the world stitching up a deal and presenting the UK with a fait accompli. I want to finish on a political point. There'll be some, certainly among those who sadly left the Conservative Party over Brexit, perhaps some this evening, who will question whether there's any point to us pushing these arguments, whether the government, the party leadership, the party membership is going to listen. I am more hopeful. Now, that's partly because of what the Prime Minister and others have said since the TCA was agreed, partly too because of electoral dynamics. Without that fifth of the Conservative vote that came from people who voted to remain, we would not have a Conservative government in office. By the time of the next election in 2023 or 2024, the party will have been in it for 13 or 14 years. Our opponent will not be Jeremy Corbyn. The danger will be greater that voters will think it's time for change. There will be more new voters on the register, and they will, on average, be more internationalist and more pro-European than those that they replace, because we know about how young people voted overwhelmingly to remain in 2016. If the Conservative Party can show that outside the EU it can still work effectively and successfully with its neighbours, it will have a better chance of winning those people's votes. And let's not forget of reassuring people in Scotland and in Northern Ireland that while we may have left the EU, the United Kingdom is still strategically and culturally part of Europe. Above all, though, I believe that we should adopt the approach I have sought to describe in these remarks, because it is in our national interest to establish a new special relationship, to use Michael Gove's phrase, with our European neighbours. And for every Conservative, it is the national interest that should come first. After the passions and divisions within the country and the Conservative Party over our membership of the European Union, it's understandable if some in the CEF feel a bit daunted by the scale of the task that we're setting for ourselves. But we should take heart from the fact that among our existing members and supporters, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience of UK politics and of working with other European countries. And we know that a close friendship, a special relationship with our friends and allies next door is what young voters who support the Conservatives will want to see. So today, let us start on this new mission with determination and with confidence. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to make a remark, there's the chat function open, or if you want a question, the question and answer function is open. I should say that I'm not sure how much time we'll have, but I know that Simon Saunders will be taking down all the questions, and I'll make sure we get a response over the next few weeks, over the next few days. David, thank you so much for that speech. It was hugely fascinating, interesting, encouraging, and encompassed a huge amount of ground. But can I start where you finished? You've set out an ambition for the Conservative European Forum. It should be the advocate for a close strategic partnership within the party. And that does require us effectively to build an alliance between the pragmatic leavers, the fifth of Conservatives who voted Remain, and of course the new voters you spoke about. Is a measure of success about whether we are achieving that and persuading the Conservative Party, whether you persuade the Prime Minister to join?
I think it's something that we should have as an objective. It's not my immediate priority. I think the reality is that we are probably still too close to the moment of Brexit, to what has happened in the last few years, to expect a huge change of heart. I think that the immediate, but it's something I want to have. I mean, the Prime Minister is one of those who's always spoken of leaving the EU rather than leaving Europe. So I think we should be trying to persuade him and other ministers to take an interest in what we're doing, to speak to meetings of the CEF. I see absolutely no reason why a Conservative minister, the Foreign Office, or perhaps the Treasury should be afraid of coming and speaking to us. And that's something I will be working on. I think the foremost priority, one of the foremost priorities, is to boost our declared support within Parliament, particularly the House of Commons. There's, for reasons we all know, there's been a big changeover of members of Parliament on the Conservative benches, and there are a number who, while personally sympathetic, who supported Remain in 2016, feel nervous because they don't want to upset their constituency activists, or amongst the younger MPs, they don't want to upset the leadership in the Whip's office too much. But also there's a sense of world weariness. I mean, the great appeal of Boris Johnson's slogan in 2019 of "Get Brexit Done" was not that it meant a hard exit, but that it meant taking this wretched subject out of the news bulletins and the headlines, which, the sense of weariness amongst the electorate and in the party is very significant indeed. So I think one's got to win those people back, and that's partly by exploring some of the, if you like, domestic policy issues, but which have a European and a global dimension. So climate change, future financial services, how you compete in a digital world and a global marketplace. And that starts to get people engaged without them thinking that they're having to get into trenches again in the battles of the previous 5 years.
Thank you. I was particularly struck by a couple of things, a number of things in your remarks, but particularly you used the phrase at one stage, a global Britain can only fully succeed if it's a European Britain. I wondered, following on, do you think that the current government is able to move to that, or do they still see some of the petty battles as a way of achieving popularity? And how can we in the Conservative European Forum, I think, influence the government to recognise how important that their ambitions for global Britain will only succeed?
It's partly about the language that we use, which is why I think, in what we say and do, we have to be talking all the time about the future, not, sort of, we're going to have to spend, I'm afraid, a bit of effort just making sure people understand this is not some Trojan horse project to refight the referendum campaign. But I think that any minister who is trying to deal with subjects that have an international dimension will come up against the reality that the European Union collectively and individual countries within the European Union are significant players and influences in the making of global policy. If you're going to be talking about a set of global rules on, let us say, digital taxation of the Amazons and the like, or if you're looking at a global agreement on transparency to try to cut down on money laundering, then the EU is going to be one of the dominant global players, and British ministers are going to have to think and work very hard indeed to make sure that the particular UK perspective is heard, is understood, and where possible influences the evolving global outcome. So I think that I think there will be a readiness to do it, and I think the chances of that grow simply as time goes on. There will be a temptation on some people's part to sort of try and stoke the fires and sort of look for enemies. I was very struck by how the Prime Minister yesterday at his press conference, though, deliberately refused to rise to the bait that the journalists laid out for him over vaccines. You look at the headlines in the British press today, and it's all, these wicked people in Brussels, they're trying to take our vaccines. Boris Johnson just sort of wants to almost dismiss the issue. Look, this is a great international project as a rolling out vaccines worldwide. Everybody needs them for any of us to be safe. And there's an issue obviously between the Commission and its supplier, and just wouldn't be drawn. And I think that sort of sign, I think, is quite hopeful that from the top of the government they want to move on. And I think the impact of Biden coming in, you have a president in the White House who sees the EU as a partner, wants it to succeed, rather than one who sees it as a sort of global foe and rival, is important in helping shift British attitudes in the right way.
I'd like to come on very briefly to President Biden in a moment, but I think that people would have been struck in your remarks. Like you, I attended Euro councils, and one understood the importance of informal events. And so you spoke of the UK's need to accept that our relationship with our European friends cannot only be bilateral in nature; it must be with European institutions, and the need to, I think you said, build mutual trust with the Commission. I just wondered how at what sort of level should we be pitching that politically, and do you think this should? How you see that actually being established?
It's. I think that it is a matter of trying to, in terms of British audiences, is bust some of the mystique around the Commission. But the Commission is actually a relatively transparent organisation. You can often find stuff that what's going on much more easily from the Commission than from some departments in Whitehall. But I think that this is something where we need to work on ministers, on members of select committees. I think that, for example, actually, one of the things every organisation has had to do as a result of COVID is conduct many more, much more work online. And, we, CGE, CEF, but our think tanks, Parliament, have conducted the select committee interviews and so on remotely. Now, actually, with a bit of luck, this will get the select committees, some of their inquiries at least, sort of engaging with the Commission without feeling they have to wait for a trip to Brussels to try and do that. But I think we in Britain have to take the initiative here. So I think it's got to, some of this will be official, but and the officials want to get on with this. But we have to persuade ministers, we have to persuade people in select committees and use parliamentary networks. The other thing, of course, that will matter is business. And I think that, again, whether you are looking at financial services industry or whether you are looking at the food and drink industry or automotives or aerospace, their business is going to be affected by what decisions are taken in the EU, even though we're no longer a member. The EU will continue to revise its legislation, will set new rules from time to time and so on, and any business trading with Europe is going to have to need to conform with those, or any business part of the supply chain that goes into the EU single market is going to have to comply with those rules. So actually the UK system is going to have to work very hard indeed to, in the way Norway does, in the way the United States does already, to ensure that their interests are known and understood in the Commission and in the European Parliament, as well as working bilaterally with the member states who will show up at the Council. They will need to beef up our embassies. I think we're doing around Europe, and that's good. But you're going to need to have a really excellent team at ACMIS in Brussels as well. I think business can influence the political debate here as well in a constructive way.
I think you're very right to make that point. I was going to reflect that if you look at the TCA, the two big admissions, one of which you've obviously talked about, the UK strategic point of view, the lack of a structured security and foreign policy cooperation, but also from a UK economic point of view, the fact, understandably, trade agreements quite often don't encompass services, but the failure to look at that initially and probably the limited scope of the memorandum that may well be signed are things that the UK government are going to have to work hard for. And I think it's probably an area where we in the Conservative European Forum should look to try and establish policy positions and influence as quickly as possible.
I agree with that. I think it's good. I think financial services, in particular services generally, is an important area that we should explore as a priority because we're in a different position now because we have left. I mean, I can remember more than one occasion where George Osborne, as Chancellor, turned up to ECOFIN and almost single-handedly turned around a debate there and made sure that the regulational directive came out in a way that met UK's needs. And the others understood it because we were an important member state and this was clearly a vital national interest, just like German automotives and French farmers and so on. And they took account of that. Now we're outside the room now, so we don't have that influence. And actually, it'd be an interesting question. I suspect different city institutions may have different views on this, about the extent to which they would want to take the risk of accepting, in effect, regulation from EU institutions when, while the stock of business is high with the EU and North America at the moment, the growth areas for services business in the next half century are going to be in Asia and Latin America. So you might have different views depending on who you talk to in those industries.
I think that's coming through quite strongly. Can I just, one final question before I take a couple, I hope, from the floor. One, I noticed that you said, of course, we want our country to succeed. So we have a unique opportunity with G7 and COP26 to establish a role for Britain in the world. But the 2 points I think I just wanted to explore with you very briefly. You spoke of the need for the UK to influence the EU position prior to COP, and therefore, given Biden's priorities, I wondered how you thought that might be a chance both to deliver success at COP, cement the three-legged stool, and do something for the world.
Oh, I think this is a huge opportunity. I suspect G7 is going to be largely about COVID. It'll be another push to the global vaccination and treatment program, and trying to have an outcome that is helpful to global economic recovery, or certainly to G7, to Western economic recoveries. I think that COP is absolutely vital as an opportunity. Biden will want to show progress. He'll want to be able to show that he's getting things done. So will we. So will with the EU. But it's turning, and it's sort of general ambitions into operational plans that is the real problem here. So I think this is a massive opportunity for the British government, for the Prime Minister, and for Alok Sharma in particular. I've noticed that Alok has already started to have video calls with some of the key players around the world, and that is very welcome indeed. I was talking to John Kerry the other day. I think we do need to take that forward, but we've really got to work hard on the EU as well, because different countries in the EU will have themselves slightly different perspectives. I mean, Spain and Germany are in different places when it comes to some of the renewable energy issues, but then the rise of the Greens in German politics is going to have an influence on their stance here too. So I think we've got to get alongside the member states and understand where the Commission and the Parliament are coming from in this. And then we've got to try and broker a compromise in Glasgow that brings together the three legs of the stool, and China and India, and God help us, Brazil, the Bolsonaro, I'm pushing it a bit. But it seems that if you can get a collective approach agreed from Washington, Brussels, London, in the chair, that puts you then in a powerful position when you are talking to some of the other major players in this debate.
Sure. We're just about to, I've got a couple of minutes before we have the video from Ken. David, so I'm going to take one question. I mean, there are 18 or 19 questions from the floor, so I'm going to send them all to you later on. But I'm going to take the one from Malcolm. It's always kind of me. Malcolm Harbour has asked, the European Parliament supports an extensive network of delegations to Parliament globally. Surely the UK Parliament must agree to establish an official delegation with the European Parliament. Do you think that's a sensible way forward? I think, as
I would expect from Malcolm, that is a very constructive idea. I hope very much that the House of Commons and the House of Lords will take that up. There'll be a bit of nervousness about among some of the hardline leaders about treating with the beast, but also there's always a nervousness amongst MPs that they get caricatured as going on a jolly foreign trip paid for by the taxpayers when they should be sitting in their offices working on local issues. So there'll be that nervousness. But I'd have thought that possibly whether the approach needs to be from President Sassoli to the Speaker and the Lord Speaker, whether it's done probably not government to government, it probably needs to be very definitely Parliament to Parliament. But really, you want the Foreign Office in particular and the Cabinet Office to try and encourage this as well, not have them trying to stop it from taking place.
I think Parliament to Parliament would establish it and put it on a permanent basis, and so I hope that can be established, and I think that behind the scenes we should try and make sure that becomes a reality. Simon, we have a message from our President, Ken Clarke. I wonder if you could run the message, please.
I'm sorry that I've only been able to attend this meeting in this virtual form, particularly as I'm very bad at the IT, so I'm not really able to participate in the meeting, even from Nottingham. But I'm delighted with David's announcement. I think it's the right way to go. I'll try to remember the new name for the Conservative Group of Europe, which I've belonged to for so long, but I think it's the right path to set out on now. Much though I regret it, and I assume all our members do, Brexit is now a fact of life. It has been done. We have to live with it and minimise the damage if you're a pro-European like myself. And the Conservative Party has to come to terms with this, which means the Brexiteers and the Remainers must now cease to be just Brexiteers and Remainers and actually try to find some common ground which puts us in the centre right of politics, where we have our broadest appeal and gives us the greatest chance of having British influence and British prosperity in the modern world. So we have to stop making arguments which get us dismissed as Remoaners when we criticise anything that's going on. The Brexiteers have to stop making silly anti-European points like this dispute that's broken out over the status of the EU ambassador, which doesn't cause problems to 140 other countries in the world who all give the EU ambassador normal, full ambassadorial status. And as the ambassador, as this powerful bloc of nations who are our neighbours, closest allies and biggest trading partners, the ambassador from the EU should be given. But we've now got to concentrate on putting back the best possible relationship with our large and powerful neighbour, eliminating obstacles to trade, but eliminating political differences wherever we can and working in harmony with them, because our interests in the modern dangerous world coincide so much, and we all need to strengthen NATO, make sure the alliance with America gets back onto a proper footing after the bizarre 4 years of Trump had changed so much, but also just make sure that when we can work with our European neighbours, we actually give ourselves an added platform which gives us some ability to defend our interests and promote our values across the world. And our position is rather like that of Canada vis-a-vis the United States, I think, trying to come to terms with the fact that we are a perfectly powerful G7 country, but we are alongside one of the three great global powers as our most important neighbour. Well, David's touched on the point, so I won't go on about the merits. Just to wish success to the new forum, to say I shall be an ardent supporter of it, of course. And I think as a group, we can help the difficult process of turning this page, which has been a bitter, divisive subject within the Conservative Party for the last 30 years and more, and actually putting us back on a more positive relationship with the best in the European Union, the best in the Conservative Party, with a broad appeal to the younger electorate who want to see us sorting out what the UK is going to be doing in today's world, the modern world, as we go further. I have enjoyed the meeting. I hope you have, and I look forward to the forum achieving a very great deal.
Well, I thought that's a great message from our President, Lord Clark, and I'm very grateful to him for overcoming the technological problems he may have with and delivering that message to us this evening. I noticed in the chat function a number of comments, one of which, of course, was from Richard Needham asking the question, do we have enough cash? The answer to that question, Richard, is that having heard David's ambitions for the group, I suspect the answer to that question, I should only respond with the words not enough. So if anyone wishes to contribute, please do. We're planning a series of webinars over the coming months, one with the European Commissioner. We also will have a number of others with our sister parties across Europe and with others. So I hope you'll join us on those occasions. But my final thanks, of course, is to David Lidington for an extraordinarily stimulating speech to us this evening. And my thanks to all of you who are joining us. We welcome new members. It's easy to join. please come and join us as the Conservative European Forum puts its foot forward and sets out to achieve a strong strategic partnership for the Conservative Party and our country with our European friends and neighbours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.